All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the February 22nd, 2022 Long-Term Water Supply Workshop. In accordance with state law, this meeting will be conducted by webinar and teleconference only. Roll call, please. Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman.
Present.
Director Katz.
Present.
Director McIntosh.
Here.
Director Mellon.
Present.
Director Patterson.
Present.
Director Young.
I am here.
President Lenny.
Here. We are now at public comment. If members of the public wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items, in other words, those not related to the long-term water supply workshop, will be heard at the beginning of the workshop now. Comments on the workshop presentation will be heard at the end of the presentation. When prompted, please state your name, affiliation if applicable, and topic. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Secretary, do we have any speakers today?
I have no hands for public comment.
All right. Then let's go ahead and board members will have the opportunity to comment and ask questions. After each section of the presentation, General Manager Clifford Chan will now introduce the workshop.
Good morning, board members. It's good to see some faces in the boardroom and some faces on the screen. Today, as President Lenny noted, we'll be talking about our long-term water supply workshop update. I'll just note that we've continued to build our water supply planning efforts over quite a number of years. And as we've all seen, there are many challenges facing and affecting our water supply, including climate change. And so our planning efforts and our water supply portfolio, it's been tested by the droughts in the last decade. And new laws and regulations have also placed pressures on our water supplies. Today, we'll update you on our plans and strategies to make our water supply portfolio more resilient and sustainable. The workshop will go over each element of our portfolio, and as President Lenny noted, we'll pause at the end of each element for board questions or comments. At this point, I'll pass it on to Mike Tognolini, our Director of Water and Natural Resources, to begin the workshop.
Is that on? Good morning, President Lenny and members of the board. As Clifford noted, this is our annual long-term water supply workshop, and really just wanted to emphasize that, as is demonstrated by our current drought, that our long-term water supply planning efforts and investments have been paying off, and we're in a much better position now because of those efforts than we would be had we not done the planning and investment so far. But that's not the end of the story. We continue to face challenges with all of our water supply sources, and including climate change, regulatory challenges, et cetera. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about each of those. Next slide, please. These are our speakers for this morning in order. These really represent the experts at the district when it comes to our long-term water supply planning efforts. Linda Hu will speak after me, Manager of Water Supply Improvements. Hassan Abdullah, Supervisor of Water Transfers. Alice Toohey, Manager of Water Conservation. Charles Bolig, Supervisor of Water Conservation. Whitney Ray, Supervisor of Water Conservation. Florence Weddington, Supervisor of Water Recycling. And Brad Ledesma, Supervisor of Regional Projects. And as was mentioned, we'll pause after each section to provide the board an opportunity to ask questions. Next slide. And our agenda for today is really going to focus again on items 2 and 3 here. Our uncertainty with existing supplies and our water supply portfolio update. So you'll have a chance to hear about each of our water supply portfolio elements, conservation, recycling, all of our supplemental water supply programs with updates on where we stand as of today. And with that, I'll move to the next slide and turn it over to Linda Hu, Manager of Water Supply Improvements.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start off by talking about the uncertainty with existing water supplies and some of the challenges that we're facing. Next slide, please. So we're facing uncertainties in our water supplies due to climate change, which we are already seeing. It is projected that we'll see more changes in temperature, in precipitation, snowpack, evapotranspiration, and sea level rise. For temperature, it's forecasted that the temperature will increase by a little over 6 degrees Fahrenheit by the late 21st century. There will be continued increased variability in precipitation. And regarding snowpack, there will be shifts in timing of snowmelt and the runoff and stream flow, and a decrease in the snow water equivalent. And a 15% increase in evapotranspiration is projected in northern and central Sierra. And for sea level rise, a 1 foot increase by mid-century and a 3 feet sea level rise by the end of the century. And these climate change forecasts are published by the Bureau of Reclamation. Next slide. So what this means for the district is that we're facing uncertainties with our major sources of water supplies, which includes our McCollum supply, the supplemental supply from the Central Valley Project contract, local runoff from the East Bay watersheds. And due to climate change and future regulations, the future reliability of our major sources of water supply is uncertain. Next, please. Which brings us to today's workshop theme on continuing to make East Bay MUD's water supply resilient. Next slide. As you know, most of our water supply comes from the McCollum River. This chart shows the annual river flow from 1921 to 2020. The blue bars indicate normal and above year flows. The green is below normal, and the orange and the red bars are dry and critically dry years. And you can see that the McCollum River runoff is highly variable. Next slide. With the current drought continuing, you might have seen recent reports and articles published about the severity of the drought and predictions that it might last for some time. So this chart shows the Palmer Drought Severity Index for the McCollum watershed, which uses temperature and precipitation data to estimate relative dryness. What you see on the chart here in the middle, index of 0 is normal, -2 would be a moderate drought, and beyond -3 would be severe to extreme drought, while on the flip side, above +3 would be severe to extreme wet conditions. And you can see on this graphic the fluctuations in extreme events all the way from 1895 to just current day 2021. Next, please. And it shows the trend that droughts are getting more severe and more extreme and also more frequent. Next slide. Let's take a look at our CVP supplies. This table shows the historical CVP municipal and industrial or M&I allocation over time, and in particular during past drought events that we've experienced from 1976 to the current drought. The allocation percentages are shown in the first year of a drought, for the second year, third year, non. And you can see that in more recent droughts, the allocations have been decreasing much earlier on. In 2013 to 2015, the allocation was 100% in year 1, and then 50% in year 2, and 25% in year 3. And in the current drought, it was 75% in year 1 and 25% in year 2. So with Freeport, we initially assumed that CVP M&I allocation would not drop below 50% based on the Bureau's modeling and the M&I policy, which specified dropping to 50% allocation only in extreme conditions. But since then, we've actually seen CVP allocation drop below 50% in the last drought and also in the current drought. And the allocation for 2022 is uncertain at this time and could be 0%. Overall, there is definitely a decline in CVP reliability due to climate change, due to regulatory constraints, and also environmental resource protections. Next slide. Another challenge is the set of new laws and regulations that's coming our way. We're facing changing and more stringent regulations from state and federal governments. And what you see here is just a snapshot of some of the government agencies that we work with, including the Water Board, DWR, Reclamation, and many others. Next slide. And just to name a few of the regulatory uncertainties, the state and federal, and also state and federal actions that will have an impact on the district. These include increased requirements for flow requirements for the Bay Delta, state board curtailments on water rights, including the McCollum River, and water use efficiency requirements, which will be addressed in the water conservation update portion of this workshop. The key takeaway is that the district needs to continue to protect our long-term water supplies from new regulatory and legal challenges. Next slide. So we need to be prepared and adapt to all these challenges and uncertainties in our water supplies, which is what we've been doing to build a long-term water supply portfolio that is diverse, that is resilient to ensure water service reliability, especially during multi-year drought periods. Our water supply portfolio approach that you see here is developed based on the drought planning sequence and the 2050 demand projections, which are outlined in our urban water management plan. And the next series of speakers will update you on each element of our water supply strategy or portfolio, including water transfers, recycled water, and our efforts to achieve 20 MGD by 2040, progress on our groundwater planning efforts, monitoring of desalination industry, development of regional partnerships, and update of our participation in the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion by seeking additional local storage, and our efforts on water conservation to achieve 70 MGD by the year 2050. So before we move on to the next update on water transfers, let me take a pause and check if there are any questions.
Director Young?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a couple questions related to the trends, and I think you can just provide some of it, later. But I'd love to, the graph that's on page, the graphs that are on page 8 or slide, actually, I don't know whether it's slide, yeah, slide 7 through 7, 8, and 9, the uncertainty slides. It would be great to see those in comparison to some of the other watersheds, just as a sort of point of reference. And then a question on this slide 10, I guess, that shows the trend line for more extreme drought. Is there a trend on the flip side in terms of wet years? Looks like it might not be quite as, if you take out 1982, it looks like there might be, that we get less wet when we get wet, and I don't know if that's true or not. Do you know, Linda, or?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the same trend you're looking at, right? On the flip side for wet, so you can see 1982 was like the wet. So I'm not, based on this data, I'm not seeing as a clear trend based on the drought.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, Linda, I mean, the report that was written based on this data from the Palmer Drought Severity Index, really just the main conclusion was, and what you see here is that the droughts are getting deeper and more extreme. On the wet side, what you expect from the climate changes, we'll see, some periods of more rain, but you're not seeing the similar trends. And really the takeaway here is when we have the droughts, they're going to be deeper and more extreme.
Right, got that. And then my final thought, and I think it may be that it's just some, or is it the idea, the key takeaway on the laws and regulations about needing to protect our long-term water supplies from new regulatory and legal challenges. I guess we're in this thing globally and statewide, and I have a little bit about, a little hesitation on the idea that we're just in it for us, and that, we need to make sure that the that our engagement is about being on the right side of, sort of protecting our planet and protecting our state, all of our state. And so it's just, there's have a little discomfort with what I infer as a sort of parochial point of view on how we address regulatory and legal challenges. And maybe that's not, maybe I'm just reading into it wrong.
So, Director Young, that's a really good point. So, all those aspects you noted are very important. I guess on this presentation, we were focused more on the supply element of it, but your point is well noted.
Well, I mean, we have our McCollum supply, which is, we share actually with other entities as well. And then, we're part of the CVP. It's just the idea of I don't know. Just might want to think about how we project our role in being part of the solution to the long-term water supply crisis that our state and the West faces.
Agree. Thank you.
Doug, if I may?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I agree a lot with what Margarita is saying. I think one thing to keep in mind on the takeaway is we have done a phenomenal job protecting the resources that allowed our fisheries to expand during the past droughts where other entities didn't. And I think that's something that we can talk about and be proud of in terms of our efforts from an environmental stewardship, as well as, unlike others, we did our effort. It cost us money, but it was the right thing to do, and we were, I think, in history, will be vindicated for what we did from an environmental standpoint as well as from a water supply standpoint. I'd like to go back to slide 8 as well. It's a great slide, Linda, I love it. But I was wondering, maybe it's too much to ask to have, because it goes from 1921 to 2020, or 2021, I guess, have it cross-referenced with how many gallons of water we used on an annual, yearly basis in each of those years. I'd like to see that. And also have on the graph if asterisk or something to show what years we actually had, we asked for conservation and what level we received. I know it's a lot, but I think it tells a story, again, going back to what I just said previously, on what we've done, what we can be proud of what we've done, and really it's a model I wish more agencies would follow. And I think it's something that we can crow about, if that's the right word. But I think I'd like to be able to see cross-reference those or blend them into the same graph.
We could do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll look into that.
I had a thought also, because one of my concerns has been, are we out there just doing this by ourselves, or to what extent is our membership in Aqua benefiting us in this process? And over the years, I've become increasingly more uncomfortable that we're doing stuff, and yeah, they're throwing up publications and the like, but we're doing this on our own. And that has me very frustrated. So it may not be a discussion for today, but I genuinely do not feel that we have the partnerships as we have generated, for example, on the joint JPA for the McCollum, on the thing that we're working on with Los Vaqueros. I'm just very concerned that we continue to do this on our own, but we don't get any help elsewhere.
If I can speak to that, Frank, having been, I'm on all 3 JPAs, I guess, that you're referencing, or 2 of them. Really, a lot of our efforts on the JPAs at Upper Umra, and I think you'd be surprised by Los Vaqueros when we go into it later. A lot of our goals and visions are being put into the JPAs, which are, whether some agencies want to or not, are forcing them to adopt a lot of what we're doing.
The JPAs, I see that clearly, John.
Okay.
My issue is, what are we getting in terms of help from Aqua? And I don't see that. I see our staff working very hard to get these JPAs working and working well, and overcoming past frictions between EBMUD and those organizations. So, and I want to applaud staff for all that hard work, but I just feel kind of lonely that it's us with the ones that want to talk with us versus the ones who should be working behind the scenes with us.
Fair enough.
Are there any other questions before we move on to talk about the elements of the portfolio? Okay.
All right, thank you. So now I'm going to transition to Hassan Abdullah, our senior civil engineer on water transfers update.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning, directors. I will be talking about water transfers today. First slide. We have a unique CVP contract with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. we qualify for CBP allocations only during dry years when our total system storage is projected to be less than 500,000 acre-feet. So during any one dry year, our allocation is set at 133,000 acre-feet with a maximum combined limit of 165,000 acre-feet over a 3 consecutive dry year period. Our previous experience with CBP allocations has not been that reliable. In 2015, one of the worst droughts we faced and needed supplemental supplies, our allocation was cut 75% to 33,250 acre-feet only. In 2022, we are afraid that when reclamation announces the allocation sometime this week or next week, it may be limited to public health and safety only, meaning our allocations would be less than 25%. So in summary, CBP is becoming less and less reliable as the years go by. And to cope with the shortage of CBP supplies, we are developing long and short-term water transfer projects with several potential sellers in the Sacramento Valley region. Next slide, please. These are the agencies we are currently working with to develop long-term water transfer projects. Placer County Water Agency is our top priority partner. We have been working with them for over a decade now. The project involves us purchasing the water releases they make as part of the water forum agreement for the environmental benefit of the Lower American River. When they release water, it has gone through the Lower American River, we pick it up at Freeport. That's the basis of our agreement with them. The project could potentially yield up to 47,000 acre-feet of water in a dry year, depending on their water forum releases. We expect to complete the permitting requirements of this project by 2024. While we are developing the long-term project with Placer, we also have an interim agreement with them. We have the first right of refusal for any water forum water releases they make. Under that agreement, we purchased short-term water from them in 2014 and 2015. We are also working with Sycamore Mutual Water Company to develop a 10-year water transfer project based on a rolling fallowing program of rice fields. The program not only generates the transfer water for us that could be used beneficially, but also provide environmental benefits locally. In 2015, we bought short-term water purchases. We made short-term water purchases from Sycamore. This year, if we need water, we have an option agreement with Sycamore for the first right of refusal for their water. We are also working with Yuba on a 5-year water transfer program based on water releases they make for the Yuba Accord. This is for an environmental benefit. The project could produce up to 10,000 or more transfer water for us. This year, we have an agreement with Yuba that could generate 10,000 acre-feet or more transfer water for us in case we need it. One thing I'd like to point out that these 3 agencies are located in 3 major rivers in the Sac Valley area. Placer County is located on the American River, Sycamore is on the Sacramento River, and Yuba is on the Yuba River. We are working with these different agencies that has different sources of water supplies, and that provides us with some additional reliability. We're not depending on one watershed specifically. Next slide, please. This slide presents our short-term water purchases in previous year and our plan for 2022 in case 2022 turns out to be dry. In previous years, we purchased water from Placer, RD 1004, and Sycamore. In 2022, if we need water, we have agreements in place with Placer, Yuba, and Sycamore to purchase water. We are also working with other Sac River settlement contractors like GCID and RD 1004 to supplement our water supplies in case we need it. One point I'd like to make here is that because the CVP and the state water projects are becoming very, projections are low of their allocations, the short-term water transfer market is becoming very competitive this year. We not only have to be price competitive with the other buyers, we also have to be ready to make the call for water earlier than other buyers to secure the water supplies. We are working diligently with all these agencies to secure any supplemental supplies we might need this year. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. If there are any questions, I would like to take them now.
Doug, I have a
Elisa,
question.
go ahead.
So obviously water sources in California are shrinking, so I'm a bit concerned about our dependence on these water transfers in the long term, because isn't it true that climate change will also affect these partners?
Well, I mean, if I may answer, we are not only working on water transfers. We are
No, I
working.
understand that's one of our
Yes.
tools. But overall, isn't it true that climate change will affect those water sources as well?
Yes. And we are seeing that effect this year. CVP might be cutting allocations for everyone. So the buyers, I mean, the sellers we might purchase the water from, Sac River settlement contractors, their allocations are being cut also. So they may not, they have difficulties, selling any water. They may not have much water to sell this year.
Right.
And that's the
And-
difficulty.
And it
Yeah.
will be more and more difficult in the out years with the effects of climate change.
That is a correct projection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question, I guess, along the similar lines, but we recently were discussing with Marin Municipal Water District about tapping into our ability to, to transfer some water using our facilities or perhaps other facilities. Clearly, they're not the only ones who are going to be coming along looking to tap into these transfers at all. How have you factored that into the availability of these transfers in the future?
Director Lenny, as I pointed out, these transfers are getting very competitive. All the buyers, M&I, Ag, they're all in the market right now trying to purchase water. We've seen that, Marin was in the market earlier on. And before it rained in October and December, they were in the market actively looking for supplies. So,
And Hassan, maybe I'll add, that was also built in, if you recall, President Liddy, into our wheeling principles, where we talked about, if Marin moves forward with the project, we're not going to, we have the first right to the water that we have available to us. We're not going to let them buy water from underneath us. And so, as we enter into these agreements, it's important that we, make the best of the investment in the Freeport facility and benefit our customers before we look to Marin, and that was built into our principles. Mike, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just one more thing to add on that. Long-term water transfers is to avoid the competition that we see in the short-term market. So if we can secure a long-term transfer with Placer County Water Agency, for example, that water then we would have a first right to obtain, and we wouldn't be in competition on a year-by-year basis with some of the other buyers.
All right, thank you.
Okay. We're sorting out how to notice your hand being raised when you're in the room. The question I had is sort of along a similar line, although it relates to the fact that we've basically carved out this place where we're doing transfers only, I think, only in this circumstance where we're picking up water that has already been providing an environmental benefit to the originating agency, combined with the fact that we have a facility to pick up water and transfer it. Or do we have, I guess what I'm asking is, I recognize it's getting more competitive. What I'm wondering is, do those two factors where, we're really looking at for environmental water and we're able to take it when it advantages us, and maybe it gives us, do we have an advantage in that sense over other contractors who are or other water agencies who are reliant on, the pumps, at the bottom of the delta, or other facilities that they may not have as much control over when they can take the water, because we can take it, we can take it now, like we're doing with our CVP allocation. Mike, do you have or Hassan?
Yeah, and that is correct, Director Young, that the fact that we can take water at Freeport does allow us access to water that may not be available to others, because we're not limited by delta pumping restrictions at certain times of the year. So that does free up and create some opportunities. I would also say that some of the sellers, when they have a choice who they're selling water to, sometimes they're looking for agencies, buyers that have an environmental stewardship principle, and that also support, municipal, industrial, urban uses over expansion of agriculture. And that's not always the case with all the buyers, all the sellers, but with many of the partners that we've been talking to, the relationship that's built and the purpose for which the water is being used is also a factor. But make no mistake, in the short-term market, the price per acre foot is the main driver.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Don't see any other hands right now, so maybe we can move on to the next element, which is on water conservation.
Great. I'd like to hand it over to Alice Tui, our manager for water conservation. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Hassan. Good morning, Board President Linney and members of the board. I'm very happy to be here with you this morning to talk about water conservation. It's going to be a team effort. If you'd advance to the next slide, please. So you'll see the main focus of our discussion today is going to be a regulatory update. As Linda Hu mentioned, there's some new water use efficiency regulations that are coming down the proverbial pipeline. So we wanted to give the board an update on those. I'm going to start off by just a reminder of what these regulations are. I'm going to talk about the water loss component and the new indoor standards. Charles Bolig, Supervisor of Water Conservation, is then going to talk about the outdoor component and the new proposed requirements for commercial, industrial, and institutional customers. And then Whitney Ray, our other Supervisor of Water Conservation, is just going to give some high-level programmatic updates on some of the more interesting and exciting and innovative programs that we've been working on over the last year or two. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, there's three bills that we're going to be talking about today that are sort of the backbone for these water use efficiency regulations. The first is SB 555 that was passed in 2015. That relates to distribution system water loss. So that's really focused on like EBMUD and any kind of leaks or issues we have in our pipes. This regulation requires agencies to prepare annual water loss audits, and it sets performance standards that we'd be required to meet beginning in 2028. The other two bills came out of this document that you see here, Making Water Conservation a California Way of Life. This was produced by the state in 2017 after the last major drought, and it set some recommended strategies for both urban and agricultural conservation. Based on that report, the legislature passed two bills, companion bills AB 1668 and SB 606. Those were passed in 2018, and EBMUD did take a support position on those two bills. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder of what was in those two bills, essentially, they set water use objectives that agencies would be required to meet based on different components. So you can see the water use objective, it includes an allocation for distribution system water loss. There's an allocation for indoor residential use that's based on your population and some allocations on a per person basis that go down over time. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. There's a component for outdoor residential use, and that's similar to what we did for SB X77, where we chose target method 2, and we looked at sort of, we had aerial imagery of landscapes and calculated water budgets based on our estimate of irrigated areas. And then there's a similar calculation for dedicated commercial irrigation. Now you'll notice here that there's nothing here, in this water use objective about the CII sector. So that's, what sort of indoor water use for commercial, industrial, and institutional customers. There are some performance measures that the state's working on related to that, but those are more along the lines of sort of best management practices. So those don't necessarily feed into this objective. The other thing to keep in mind is, again, this annual water use objective, that's a high level number. So let's say that you don't meet your indoor residential use, but you do really well on outdoor water use. As long as you're meeting that high level number, you're doing okay. Now, in terms of the timing, you can see here that DWR and the state board began standards development in 2018. They're a little bit behind, just I think like everybody, they were affected by the pandemic. This year, they're supposed to adopt standards, performance measures, and methods. We would begin to calculate our objective in 2023. And then beginning in 2024, the state board could begin sort of a phased enforcement. So in 2024, they can send written notices to suppliers that aren't meeting their objectives. In 2025, they can send conservation orders. And then beginning November 2027, they can actually impose fines for agencies that aren't meeting these requirements. And the fines are pretty hefty. It's about $1,000 a day if there's a violation, going up to $10,000 a day if you're in a water shortage emergency. Now, the key takeaways that I want to kind of go over today, we've been active stakeholders in this process. GWR and the state board have a number of different work groups that EBMUD staff have been part of. We've also been active through work groups as part of the ACWA, Association of California Water Agencies, and through work with other organizations like CMUA and Water Reuse Association. Now, some of these components have changed somewhat since what was in the original legislation that EBMUD supported. So we wanted to make sure that we gave you an update on that. Next slide, please. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the water loss component, and this is what's laid out in SB 555. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's sort of two big parts to this. The first is that agencies have to submit validated annual water loss audits. That's where we go through and we do an assessment of our system and try to actually figure out how much real losses we have, and then things like apparent losses, which is things like meter inaccuracies. EBMUD's been doing water audits for a long time. We just, as a result of this legislation, we formalized our process. We have an internal committee that meets regularly. We have different, we've assigned responsibilities to different work groups, and we do go through the process of actually, having a validator validate our water loss audits. The other big component of SB 555, of course, the main one is the performance measure. SB 555 charges the state board with setting performance measures, and those are real losses expressed in terms of gallons per connection per day that utilities have to meet. So the state board will set specific targets for 2028 that we have to meet. Those are calculated using a state board model that includes both water loss components and economic components. And it has a lot of default parameters in that model. Agencies can require adjustments, and basically you can customize some of the features, some of the components and inputs to the model if you can provide documentation. So currently where this is, it's been kind of a lengthy process. There's been a lot of interaction between water agencies, experts on water loss, and the state board. They began their formal rulemaking process December 24th and finished in February. EBMUD did submit a comment letter. We've been very active in this process and have had meetings with state board staff. At one point, the state board was working with UC Davis on development of the model. We met with them. So, we have been very active. Next slide, please. So in terms of where it landed, you can see here in this chart, really the district's regulatory standard, it's very much up in the air. We did submit a letter to the state requesting adjustments for some of those specific inputs to the model. So what our actual water loss performance measure will be depends on whether they accept those adjustments. You can see here that the current value real losses is about 44 gallons per connection per day. The different scenarios, if the state board, if you just go with the default numbers that are in the state board's model, we would have to go down to 23 gallons per connection per day. That's about a 47% reduction. One adjustment that we requested was pretty significant. That was the infrastructure condition factor. If that got approved, our reduction would only be 12%, going down to 39. And if the state board approved of all our requested adjustments, then basically we would be meeting the standard already. And if I could have the next slide, please. You can see this here graphically. You can see this chart. These dots show our different water loss audits over time. You can see that some of those are kind of grayed out. Like I mentioned, we've been doing water loss audits for a long time, even before it was a requirement. But you can see here again, if they don't approve any adjustments, if you just go with the default parameters in the volume in the model, it would be a pretty significant reduction in our real losses that we'd be required to meet. If they approve that ICF, that one adjustment, we would have to go down to 39 gallons per connection per day. And if they approve all our adjustments, we'd basically, on average, be meeting the requirement.
And Alice, I'll just add, this came in late on Friday, but the state board did respond to us and they approved all of our adjustments.
Yay!
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like a confetti button or something on Zoom, but that's good news. And we would be basically we're essentially meeting the requirement as is. So that's good news for us. If you could go to the next slide, please.
Okay. This is
Sorry.
confusing. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So next I want to focus on the water use efficiency standards that are more things geared towards, us and in terms of our customers' water use. And again, just a reminder, these water use efficiency requirements, they set high level objectives that we as an agency have to meet. One important component is the residential indoor standard. So this is looking at how much, on average customers use in their homes. The regulations set standards for 2020, 2025, and 2030 there were some standards proposed in the legislation, but then the legislation also said that DWR and the state board should conduct necessary studies and investigations and potentially recommend different standards. And so that's what you see here on this table. You see what the standards were based in the original legislation, and then what the DWR and state board recommendations are. And you can see that they're keeping the 55 gallons per person per day for 2020, but you can see that the recommendation from DWR and state board staff would lower the indoor standard in 2025 and in 2030. So going from, instead of 52.5 gallons per person per day that was in the original legislation for 2025, we'd have to meet 47 gallons per person per day. And in 2030, instead of 50 gallons per person per day, the standard, if this if this recommendation is approved, would go down to 42 gallons per person per day. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for East Bay MUD? And where are we right now? So just looking at 2021 indoor residential water use, and this is just an estimate. This is looking at, basically, we just look at like January and February residential water use divided by our population, just to get a rough ballpark. In 2021, we're at about 54 gallons per person per day. That is a little bit higher than it had been in the past. We definitely did see an increase in indoor residential water use as a result of COVID. Not surprisingly, folks are spending more time at home, cooking at home more, using the bathroom at home more, things that they might have been doing at work or kids at school during the day, they're doing at home. So that's just a shift in water use from different sectors to the residential sector. And that is one of our, sort of concerns about the regulation long-term is just, there is some uncertainty regarding, sort of the long-term future of telecommuting, whether some of these trends that we've seen as a result of COVID are going to continue and result in a shift in water use from the commercial sector and the institutional sector to the residential sector. There's also just potential impacts to wastewater and recycled water. Just anytime you're reducing water consumption, particularly indoor consumption, that means you have less flows for wastewater and for recycled water projects. So that's something that we're looking at. Meeting this new requirement, I do want to let the board know that would require an investment. And the key takeaway is that this is going to require different tools than what we've used in the past. Historically, a lot of our indoor programs have focused on things like rebates for toilets, clothes washers, device distribution, low flow shower heads, that kind of thing. We've reached market saturation for a lot of those programs. And due to sort of updates to code, a lot of those high efficiency features are kind of baked in at this point. So, we're not necessarily going to be able to lower our indoor water use through things like rebates. What we're going to be looking at more is information systems. Like you can see in this picture, we've got a picture of our home water report here, tools like leak alerts, information that helps customers to better understand and monitor and manage their water use, particularly tools that help customers find leaks faster. You can see this bottom picture is a what we call a smart meter. It's AMI, advanced metering infrastructure. That's another tool that could help us by giving better data so that, if we have more frequent meter readings, we have more data, we can do things like catch leaks sooner and have a better understanding of how customers are using their water so we can help them to save water. So that's the indoor component. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Charles Bolig, who's going to talk a little bit about the outdoor component.
Thank you, Alice. And Brad, next slide. So as Alice just finished the indoor component for residential, now we have the outdoor, and this is called the landscape area measurement. And the state had analyzed, I guess, irrigated area for 399 large water utilities in the state of California. And they came up with essentially 3 categories. So for the landscape area measurement, we have the irrigated, and that's pretty much as it sounds, when you satellite view, you see a big piece of landscape that is obviously irrigated with supplemental water. It's past the rainy season. Next is irrigable, not irrigated. That is something like it, but from the satellite view, you see a front yard, and it's all brown. It's not getting any supplemental water. So it's currently not being irrigated, but it has the potential in the future to be irrigated. And then the last classification is not irrigable. And that's essentially something on a hillside, it's very steep, or areas that butt up against open spaces, things of that nature. So also in this component for this calculation on essentially this bucket of water that we'll have for the outdoor component is how they're going to do that calculation of the water needs for this landscape area measurement. So next slide, Brad. So you've seen photos like this from water conservation previously. We've got a picture A, B, and C. So satellite imagery is taken, essentially they try to do it at the end of June, beginning of July, and that essentially eliminates any shadows. So you get a really clear photo going straight down. Then the Department of Water Resources with a third-party consultant that we've are familiar with, essentially put polygons on everything. So it's a little bit of machine learning. So you can see all those various shapes on that semi-imposed on that image. So once they put it into those different polygons, then they start using infrared with machine learning again to put it in one of those classifications that I just mentioned. And you can see that it, grabs the irrigable, not irrigated, pools, irrigable. So essentially that looks at our surface area and gives us a number. So they go all single family residential as well as multifamily. Next slide, please. So on this particular component, the irrigated number that the state has presented to EBMUD is 745 million square feet. You can see I've got that circled in red. And the irrigable, not irrigated, 607 million, and then 2.1 billion on the not irrigated. So how does that number work out for us? We are comfortable with that number. Some of you may remember some of our presentations with the last state regulation of 20% reduction by the year 2020. And so EBMUD, at that time, there were only 4 water agencies that started down this path of target method 2, and there are only 2 that kind of finished there. So we did this analysis back in 2010 and 2015. So we're really comfortable with the number that the state gave us. It matches the number of the landscape area of our own analysis that we already did. So that part of it, we're really pleased on. So the second part of this landscape area measurement, next slide, is how are they going to do the calculation of how much water does that area need to keep it healthy. So as being our service area, East Bay MUD, we have in addition to being very diverse in our population, we're really diverse in our climate. Essentially, we've got 3 dominant climate zones. We've got that, kind of Bay coastal influence. So Oakland, Berkeley, El Cerrito, a lot of fog, very moderate in its climate. Then we have our transitional zone, and that is the La Marinda area where it gets pretty hot during the day, but at nighttime the fog comes over the hills and cools that area down a little bit. And then we've got our very hot climate zone. So that's the 680 corridor, the Alamo, Danville, Blackhawk area. So one thing about this component that's it hasn't been determined what our number is going to be, but the state is only going to allow one ET value, the reference evapotranspiration, for us. So kind of another way to put it is a landscape in Berkeley is going to use, and if you take that same landscape and move it on over to Danville, it's going to use more than 20% water just because of the additional heating for it. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to wait and see what number is presented for us. We're doing an internal analysis inside East Bay MUD with our landscape area to see which one is going to be a good number for us. Like, as I mentioned, we have 3 distinct climate zones. We have 3 different numbers, but the states will only allow us to use 1. The second part of it, which is something that has not been added into any equations before, and the Department of Water Resources has not even used it with their CIMIS, which is a California Irrigation Management Information Systems, which is a bunch of weather stations, is effective precipitation. So that ET value number that I just mentioned is what keeps landscapes healthy during the summertime. They're going to essentially subtract from that total water amount, essentially effective precipitation in the winter months. And we know there's not necessarily a lot of carry on over. They haven't done this before. They're going to do it on soil moisture content. So this is going to make it a little bit more challenging. So if our number was 45% reference ETO, and they say subtract 5 for the effective precipitation, that number that we have to work with, what we get to use and calculate in our budget is going to be reduced a bit. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge going forward on that. Next slide. So the way this regulation is working on out from 23 to 29, they're going to use 80% ETF, and that is the evapotranspiration factor. Essentially, what is the requirements of the plants to keep them healthy? One thing, I got that little asterisk after ETF on that first line, is that they are assuming an irrigation efficiency, and this is how efficient is a sprinkler or drip or bubblers on distributing the water on the landscape. And they chose a really high number, in that 80%. That 80% is even challenging with drip irrigation. So that essentially reduces the amount of water on the landscape. So that there you can start to see there's starting to be a little bit of a stacking going on a little bit of hurdles for us. In 2030, all the water requirements for those plants is going to be reduced down to 65%. So right now we're at 80, and we're going to go to 65. New developments, and this has been since 2015, and we've been reviewing sites for this through our new business process, our Section 31 water efficiency requirements, is a 55.55 MWELO, and MWELO stands for the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. And this is how efficient or how much water a landscape can use on that. And then the last part of this component is also the special landscape area, and this is mostly for large sports fields, and they're a reference ET at 1.0. And then at the end, I've got a little bit of a summary slide, because I'm going to combine the numbers, or show you the numbers for both the commercial and residential. Next slide, please. So on the commercial, the CII, and this is, as Alice mentioned, this one's still being developed, and the kind of the, I guess the parameters to work in are still being kind of figured out. So on this particular one, they essentially break it into 2. So standards based on accounts with dedicated irrigation meters, and then a performance measured base. So East Bay MUD is going to fall into that dedicated irrigation meters. Next slide, please. And part of the reason that we're falling into that dedicated irrigation meters, we've had a long-standing practice at East Bay MUD for requiring dedicated irrigation meters for these large landscapes. So in the commercial sector, that has been our standard practice, and we've done it because it is a great way to help customers manage that resource. So you're not mixing what's going on indoors and outdoors together in one meter. You've got your outdoor meter, and you've got your indoor meter. So as I just went through some of the calculations for the residential, the state pretty much said that we ran out of time on this legislation. Alice mentioned, with COVID and stuff, things were kind of stacking up and getting behind. So they're essentially adopting the same calculations that they have for the residential that they're going to have for the commercial landscapes. The only difference being is that the MWLO for commercial customers is going to be lower than the residential. I mentioned in that previous slide, residential is 0.55, and that's how efficient it is. So think of grass as 1.0, but a cactus is going to be, on the other extreme, maybe 0.2, 0.22 or something like that. So for the residential accounts, the new sites are going to be at 0.45. Not to be, continuing to bring a little bit of challenges, but we have been monitoring, working with these customers since 2015 that have been following on the commercial side of following MWLO and being able to obtain that 0.45 ETF, and it's been very challenging for them. And so all these new accounts that are going to be coming online for large dedicated irrigation meters, as well as the large landscapes that are going to be rehabilitated, they're going to have a pretty, high or low target. It depends how you want to look at that perspective on that. But being able to reach 0.45 ETF is a challenge for a lot of them right now and will be going forward. One thing that's going to help East Bay MUD, and this is a long-standing program we've had here, we have our IRIS program, which stands for Irrigation Reduction Information Systems. And this is our water budgeting tool. This is a tool we developed decades ago. It got updated in 2010, where we compare what the water demands are from the landscape versus what they're actually using. And we send these reports to these water managers at these sites. And so this tool is going to be utilized even more so going forward, because it's going to really help our customers, help us as a community meet these new requirements. Next slide, please. So one thing that is still, there was a meeting a couple of weeks ago that Alice and I both attended. Things are still under development. Is what do you do with the indoor component and ones that have a little bit of outdoor? So the state has come up with what they're going to be calling grouping all of these sort of businesses into 19 classifications. So you all remember that East Bay MUD has our business classification codes that came out of our wastewater group, and I think there's 82 BCCs. So we're going to have to take our 82 and then combine them into 19 different classifications. And the Department of Water Resources is calling this crossroads. Because some water utilities have SIC codes and other ways of classifying the various commercial, industrial, institutional sectors. Part of this is also going to be what they're going to be calling the reporting is processed water. And then processed water is still something to determine what is an actual definition of processed water. So if you think of somebody like a bottler of soda pop, well, the majority of the water goes in this business, and that business is going to be reprocessed for consumption somewhere else. But a restaurant, where does all that water go into? Is it the bathrooms considered processed water for the customers versus what the employees are using? So there's a little bit of confusion still going on amongst the water utilities on how this is going to be defined. But the first part is that we're going to be doing this crossroads where we're going to start to report on these all of our commercial customers on the indoor component from our BCCs into the 19 classifications. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for us in these two components? So where are we at and what's the 2030 projections? So I started with that landscape area measurement for single family residential. So just doing our initial calculations of our consumption that we're doing right now and that landscape area measurement, we're below target, which is fantastic. East Bay MUD customers have always been very responsive, have been great of adopting new landscapes, very efficient landscapes. In 2030, all the projections are with our growth and our demand and dropping down to that 0.65, we are still targeted to be below what that landscape area measurement water requirement is going to be. So we're looking real good. On the outdoor component, in 2022, we are below target. However, when those numbers drop for the commercial sector, they start to intersect a little bit, or they're heading on a trajectory. Well, actually, I'm sorry, this on Zoom is kind of tough to do. That they're starting to get too closer, the lines of where we can't exceed and the water consumption going on up. And then on the indoor, as I mentioned, it's still under development. So the kind of the big takeaways for this one is that, not to, kind of piggyback on Alice, is that we're going to need additional investments. Right now our customers use water 365 days a year, and we give them 6 points of data a year through our billing cycle because most of our customers are on bi-monthly. So something like AMI to be able to help us and help our customers realize, are they irrigating 7 days a week, or are they irrigating way above what they should be? So we're going to need tools to be able to communicate that information to our customers, and also our incentive programs. We're essentially going to have to continually work for our lawn conversion rebate programs to get our customers to reduce the amount of turf, because turf is typically one of the higher users out in the landscapes. So a combination of informational services that Dallas and myself mentioned to be able to help our customers manage that water resources, and then also continually invest in conservation for those landscapes are some of the big drivers. With that, I would like to turn it on over to Whitney Ray, who is going to be talking about some of the exciting things that we've been doing in the last year. Whitney?
Hang on a second.
Thanks, Charles.
Whitney,
Hold on.
yeah, if you call in a minute, we have a few questions.
Well, I think it might be helpful. I have some questions on the regulatory side of this presentation, and that might be helpful to do now versus later. I don't know, Doug.
There's a lot here.
Yeah, there's a lot of newish information, and it's so if we could.
Yeah, feels like we should take a few questions now. So go ahead, Marguerite.
Yeah. So what on the it is a lot to unpack here. On going back to the water loss thing, I feel like I need a little bit more education about this topic. I think this is the first time that I've seen the gallons per connection per day figure, and I know at least for the side of the ward, my ward that's on this side of the hills, this number is more than what many of our customers use per day. So we're losing as much, and I don't know if that's the right way to think about it in terms, because 44 gallon, my household is around 30 gallons per day, I think. Although I have more people now, but to me it seems like a high number. And I'd just like to understand the whole water loss picture better. So that's not really a question. It's sort of like just I'm just needing more. On the effective precipitation thing, and maybe this can be picked up in the programmatic discussion, but it seems to me that this effective precipitation standard would imply that programs that help people kind of extend winter or lessen their irrigation season beyond what their landscape is would be helpful. So where previously we haven't necessarily given a lot of merit to rainwater collection or sort of things like this might, I'd like to understand how much this could move that needle. The other thing that I think about are landscaping improvements like berms and other things that help increase soil water retention capacity over sort of over time, so that you're not starting to irrigate until the end of May or something like that versus beginning in April. as an example. So maybe that's something that Whitney can address in the sort of programmatic side. And yeah, I've always thought that the number that the state is hitting for indoor water consumption is too high, but, you know, so I'll just mark that down. But so so one is a request, help us understand the water loss thing better. And the second is, can you address the effective precipitation thought I had in the programmatic?
Yeah, and if I may just Whitney can talk about this a little bit more. You know, some of those things that you mentioned in terms of the effective precipitation are things that we're trying to roll out. Like Whitney's going to talk about our super rebate, our lawn rebate program that is really trying to encourage folks to do more in terms of things like soil health, use of compost, some of those measures that, like you said, do kind of help to just improve the ability to retain some of that water. And then I think maybe Clifford, you know, maybe we can talk offline about the best approach for getting the board some more information on the water loss component.
Yeah, we can do that and talk about how that SB 555 works, what the 44 means relative to what we've done before, and really what's driving everything. But it is very complicated, but I think with some time it actually is very understandable too. But it's hard to unpack everything given all that the states have been doing with their economic model to set these standards.
Yeah, and I do want to apologize for kind of hitting you all at once with all these different regulatory components that are, some of them, quite complicated. It's kind of, you know, as we mentioned, it's, you know, the state's been kind of working on it for the last couple of years, but it's only on some of these components, it's only in the last few months that we've really actually started to kind of see where they're headed and what the regulations would look like. So we'll do our best to try to help understand.
Thank you.
Doug, may I?
Go ahead.
Thank you. One question I have, because it'll come up in terms of indoor usage, is there a ability for medical use, since there are a number of people with medical use needs for water that may drive up for indoor usage? That was not listed here, if that's one of the variants that's allowed for an exemption or greater discretion. I didn't see that presented. If to find that out, and that maybe that can't be answered today. On the climate zone on slide 31, are we advocating for one of the 3 climate zones in our area? I guess I would advocate for the number 3, the 680 zone, because that comes into play on number 2, on effective precipitation in terms of our water delivery needs in that area. And also everything we're talking about here, I know we're talking about down the road having 70,000, I think it's 70,000 acre feet of water conserved, if I'm not mistaken, from the deck, having read it this weekend. Do these meet that, get it to that 70,000, or does it push it past the 70,000 or not? Maybe we'll find that out later in the presentations, but want to make that. But I would just hope that we'd advocate for the 680 zone on the ETO on slide 31. And finally, I know we talked at slide 24 was AMI. We've talked about it. If this is going to be happening, which a lot of this is good stuff, is the state going to be coming in to help pay for the AMI? Because that is extremely expensive with the number of meters that we have. And I know we've looked at testing AMI in parts of the service area where some of the meters don't pan out, they don't play out, and you know we spend a lot of money, and then in a few years they're broken. And so is there now a meter, or are there meters that would meet the needs long term where we wouldn't, I think it was $100 million, if I'm not mistaken, to switch everybody over, or more than that, that would be a meter that would work for more than 7 years. I mean, this is costly. It's not things that we shouldn't be doing, but is the state going to help fund the AMI meters, which would be a huge rate increase to convert over? And I know we need to do it so people know, I mean, what they're using, so they don't get a bill, you know, 49 days after their last bill and find out they have this huge leak, which we've all had issues with constituents. So that's where my questions and points are.
Yeah, and just quickly on the AMI piece, the board awarded a contract a few meetings ago to do that business case analysis to look at the costs and benefits. So we'll have that completed, and the goal is to have that completed as we get to the next budget cycle, because as you noted, it's a very expensive project for us to move forward on. And so I'll look at the costs and the benefits as well. And Alice, do you want to respond to a couple of the other questions, or?
Yeah, definitely. So there are variances. We didn't go into here because it's already kind of a lot. So there are some variances that are set out in the legislation. Things like, agencies that use recycled water. There are variances for agencies that have, certain amounts of agricultural use. I don't remember off the top of my head if there is one for medical uses. I know they have things like swamp coolers. Yes, Charles is shaking his head. I don't think there is one for medical uses specifically, but that's something that we can look at. And again, just a reminder that that's not something that we're asking individual customers to meet. That's like an agency-wide goal that we would have to meet.
Well, I would advocate, Alice, on the medical need. All too often, not in all cases, people who have the medical necessity for more water often are not having the ability to work maybe at a full capacity, therefore they're in the lower economic bracket, or they're retired and senior citizens on a fixed income, that this could have a huge financial impact for them.
Yeah, understood. And we did, that is something just related to that. that is, we and Aqua and CMUA and a lot of the other water agencies have commented to the state just on, while we totally love water conservation, want to do more about it, the concern about, potential rate impacts and potential impacts specifically to, our disadvantaged customers. That is a concern. In terms of funding, that's another thing we've commented on quite a bit. Last I heard, the governor's latest budget, proposal for this year did include some additional funding for conservation. And I believe he's also requesting a specific chunk of money for lawn rebates specifically, because the state kind of understands that that's an area where, statewide, a lot of work needs to be done. I don't remember seeing anything about AMI specifically, but certainly, as Clifford mentioned, as we're working on the business case, that's something that we're going to be looking at, is whether there's funding available through the state or possibly from, reclamation. Like we had gotten about $1 million in grant funding over the last few years from reclamation to do an AMI project. So we will, of course, be looking for grant funding, absolutely.
And perhaps through the Federal Infrastructure Act of $1.3 trillion, there may be some money that could be used in that area.
Yeah, we will certainly look at that. And then your other question was just on the which sort of zone, what ETF number we're going to get. We're definitely going to be advocating for something that's fair for our service area. Recognizing we're in a little bit of a different situation than some agencies where maybe they are just sort of one climate zone for the agency. But for us, we've got our east of hills and west of hills, which, as Charles mentioned, very different climates.
Thank you very much.
Alice?
Can I just break in for a minute? I had my hand up a long time and nobody ever called on me. What I wanted to get on the table, because we've done such outstanding work in our supply area and such outstanding work on the youth side, conservation has always been out front. When the governor declared his emergency, we'd already met it, because we were already there. What I'm worried about, and particularly, I'm on the finance side too, looking at how we are able to deliver our service. And it appears to me that less use of water, all of that's going to cost more, and we're doing that. We're pressed on the front end of conservation for the whole state. Our district does a tremendous job, but somewhere in between, our customers, our ratepayers are going to have to carry a heavy burden for less water use by them and all the other things that are being imposed on us from the State Water Board. And I know we're working with those, and most recently, they were cooperative. But our experience far outshines anything they can come up with. They're regulatory, and they haven't had their hands in the manure. They've been up on top, pontificating. And we've been down in the valleys and down where the water is and everything begins and ends, and we have the experience. So I'm saying there has to be a time when we come together and look at this and look at the critical impact it's going to have. All of a sudden, our ratepayers who have been very good to us and very understanding may not be that way anymore, because you may drive them into a state that you don't intend them to go. This may have unintended consequences. And I want to keep that on the table, because we got to be careful as a forerunner in the water industry that we don't end up hurting ourselves, and hurting our ratepayers hurts us, hurts the whole system. So really think about that.
Thank you for your comment, Director Patterson, and I do agree. I mean, particularly as we said, there is the concern that lower water use means potentially higher rates and potentially impact to our customers. I mean, I can say that, from water conservation's perspective, we have been starting to look at some new programs that would be specifically designed to support our low-income customers in helping them manage their water use. So that's something that we can continue to look at. But you raise a very important point.
Yeah, it's not only the ones that have the lack of ability economically, it's the ones that have the ability economically, and what position we put them in. And that's why I want to express this, because we have strong support from our base, and we don't want to ruin that relationship as we go forward. There has to be some meeting dedicated to this subject to help them understand. And I think, everybody means well, but less use of water and the new configurations, there's even some things that they don't want us to use recycled water for. And the impact on wastewater of lack of use of water, I mean, it just proliferates out. That means that those charges are going to go up as well. So it's all in a bundle. And that's what I wanted to make sure we're realizing as we go forward.
President Lenny, we have comments from the boardroom, and since I know we probably look really small on the screen, I'm going to raise my hand when a board member has a comment, and then that way you can call on the boardroom, because
We have
board members-
Director Mellon right now.
okay, and then,
Marguerite, you
let
weren't
me,
finished,
I was
so
going
go
to
ahead.
suggest, excuse me, Frank, just one second. I'll suggest, I don't know if Clifford can see both better, but obviously I can't really see people on the
Right.
boardroom.
Yeah, I can see the hands, and I can see the hands that coming up here, and I'm trying to do it in the order in which I see them all pop up.
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine with you calling on them.
okay.
Okay, so we have Director Mellon.
Well, Marguerite wasn't finished, so I can wait.
It was just a comment off of John's question about the ET, what ET we get assigned. And it seems like, and I don't know, seems to me that we could mathematically figure out what our ET, for the district, what our ET is based on, how much of it is this side of the hills, how much of it is the other side of the hills, how much of it is in the transition zone. And then it's not a real number. I mean, it's not one of the climate zones, because it'll be some kind of hybrid average, but just wondering if we could then, pick a climate zone in the state's list that's as close as possible to that ET. So it's not, my concern would be if we get the higher, we advocated for the ET that's appropriate out in John's ward, that people in my ward that live on this side of the hills get a pass. right? They all of a sudden, they can, you know, use more water, if, you know, the ET factor. So I'd prefer that we have something that really actually gets at what the overall, if it's one number, if we could only have one, to have it be, you know, one that reflects what the actual.
Well, we do get in the month, in Clifford's update, once a month, we get the zones by east and west on amount of gallons of water used. It's in the very back of the packet always.
Right, I'm just saying the ET number, if we can only be assigned one, then the calculation could be something that's mathematically derived based on science, not based on water use, right?
Yeah, and, just to comment on that, I mean, that is, you know, as Charles mentioned, that conversation with the state is still ongoing, so we can certainly kind of talk to them about that. I mean, we have sort of raised to them this issue that, hey, we're a little unusual because we cross multiple climate zones, so they're aware of that. I think we just need to, you know, work with them to hopefully find a solution that's, you know, that's workable. But I hear what you're saying,
So
that
isn't ET just math, though?
there should be some way to do the math.
I'll do it for everybody.
Yeah, so as Alice said, we're still working with the state, and we'll look at what makes sense for the entire district. Director Mellon?
I'm going to be very brief. As I look at this conversation, I've got 3 climate zones in Ward 7.
Oh, yeah, me too.
You know, and I get hammered 3 different ways by folks on their water usage, and then added to that is the elevation charges. You know, and so as we're going through this, it's very complex for what we're asking staff to do, and I'll throw the last 2 curves in there. Got a lot of seniors who are homebound. And the reason why I know that is through the foundation I work with, the food delivery and the food insecurity that's in those seniors. But the flip side of that is, as we're talking about extra water usage, and then we got the people that are having babies. So it's a real conundrum as to how you're going to juggle all of this, because folks that, you got the transition stages as well on the population. So I'm just saying this is not going to be an easy project, and I'm going to be bringing up those areas as we go along.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Director Mellon.
Thank you, Director Mellon. Oh, just one quick comment on that. I mean, just to be clear, you know, when we talk to the public, and I agree with Director Patterson, I think, you know, we will be thinking about doing sort of public education and, you know, on what these laws mean. We're probably not going to be talking to the general public quite so much about ETO and effective precipitation and things like that. You know, I think we're going to be looking at, like, well, what are the specific actions we're asking our customers to take? What are the specific behaviors? You know, what are the types of landscapes that are appropriate, and really kind of focusing our messaging on that, so that hopefully it's a little easier for the public, because I totally agree. A lot of this stuff is pretty complicated. And just one quick thing, I think I might have missed Director Coleman had mentioned, you know, our goal of 70 MGD by the year 2050. It is likely that, you know, meeting these new state water use efficiency requirements would require us to kind of accelerate that and maybe meet some of those targets earlier. So.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any hands right now, but maybe let's keep moving along to the programmatic updates.
Yeah, so just minding the time, I'm going to give a quick update on a few of our programs from over the past year and highlight some of the improvements and changes we've made since then. So last year when Charles gave the program update, we had been working from home all year. We weren't in person, so all of our events were on a digital platform. So that's what's been happening again this past year. So we had our fall and spring webinar series this past year, and that followed after having launched the series back in 2020 with good attendance. It was well received at the time. So it has now been integrated into our general program offerings. Customers have been attending from all across the service area, and these events have been made it so it's been much more accessible to our customers versus kind of similar in-person meetings that we'd had previously. So with that too, we also this past year expanded our webinar series to include Spanish versions for some of the webinar topics, and we will continue to branch out to offer more options to access a wider customer audience in the future. And actually coming up this next month, we'll be starting our spring webinar series and kicking it off with spring garden maintenance that will be offered in both English and Spanish. And also what kind of came out of the webinar series this past year is our new office hours. So our office hours have allowed us to cut down on some of the back and forth email communications that we have with individual customers on their landscape rebate projects. And now has allowed us to kind of gain, again, just be more accessible to our customers, allowing them to all be on this same office hours at the same time, asking their questions, hearing the questions from others, because a lot of times these customers are just learning about landscaping. And so we've found this to be really successful. We launched 2 a month this past month, and so that'll be continuing on. So we'll have one around noontime and then one in the evening. And so far we've had some pretty good feedback from customers. We've had customers return to more than one office hours to continue asking their questions and hearing other customers as well. And so while the pandemic has made us shift in ways in which we communicate with our customers and share information, some of these changes have turned out to be quite successful and have been added to our suite of services permanently. Next slide. So to continue on that thread of virtual programs, we do continue to meet with our regional partners. So we've always had our Landscape Advisory Committee, and this is something we did in person for a long time, and we've taken this electronically as well. As a result, we have had more participants coming and are continuing our speaker series and partnering with our partners, for example, Stop Waste, helping them with their initiatives surrounding compost, for example. So, this continues to roll out. We haven't skipped a beat there, working from homes on this series. So that's been good so far. And then what's been new this year is that we've also been able to work on relaunching this past month Bay Area Water Conservation Coordinators Group. So this includes all the local water agencies in the Bay Area and was a program that was going on for quite some time and then died off a few years ago, and that we just relaunched EBMUD, taking the lead on that for this first meeting last month. And it's a way for us in water conservation to get together with our regional partners to discuss regional grants for people, communications, what are they doing during the drought, what is their drought messaging, things of that nature. And this is sort of a worker level program management type group where we get together to share those ideas, figure out what we can do to collaborate on water conservation efforts in the Bay Area in general, because just because someone lives in East Bay Mud service area, that doesn't mean that they're not going into Contra Costa service area to buy a plant at a nursery. So, as a larger community, we want to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction and being responsive to all of our customers within the diverse population that we have here in the Bay Area. Next slide. And another additional update is that we are continuing to modernize our look and feel of our outreach and education resources and materials. Some of you are participants in our water reports program, so we gave that a fresh new look that you can see here. It's just a bit cleaner, easier to read. And then we also created a new water conservation template for our print resources. So you can see here is like a postcard and a bookmark size handout that we have that comes in handy during drought years like today to highlight our lawn garden program, ways that people can save during this time. And we kind of created this initially with the thinking that we'd be handing these out at community events, which are still on hiatus at the moment, but we will certainly be bringing these back once we get back out there. Next slide, please. And then the last bit I have to talk about is our incentives program. So we did create 2 new rebates this past year. Our super rebate it's more towards our residential customers, but commercial customers are eligible. And then our median strip rebate geared more towards those commercial customers. So with the super rebate program, we've doubled that incentive offer to $1.50 a square foot and have added additional requirements that need to be done that would then potentially increase water savings in exchange for that increased incentive amount. So we require California native plants. That'll set up the customer for success, since the plants will have a higher probability of surviving, can handle drought stress. We're also asking our customers to plant in the fall and winter season to increase that plant success, where they'll be getting more natural rains for those plants to take hold during that time. And then we're also asking for compost and sheet mulching, which are both, again, to help retain that soil moisture that we talked about earlier, and then also keeping the grass in place instead of having it shipped off to a landfill, for example. So we're still going to be keeping our maximum rebate set at $2,000 for now, but we may revisit that if we end up in another dry year, and potentially increase it if we see a demand to do so. And then for our commercial customers, the median strip rebate is also $1.50 a square foot. And part of the reason we are targeting these median strips that you would normally see in the middle of the roads, or those little lawn strips that you see between the road and the sidewalks with the park, is because they're extremely inefficient to irrigate and aligns with some of the new state requirements that have been put out there. So we've been working with our cities and large HOAs to remove some of that. And then lastly, I just wanted to just touch on some of our additional rebates and really kind of focus specifically on our flow meter rebate program, as it's continued to be very popular, and it makes sense in our highly digitized world now that we're in. Information is readily available at our fingertips. And so our customers are increasingly demanding that ability to see their water usage in real time and, being able to check to see if they might have some high usage, maybe they've got a leak, and, being able to see that usage on an hourly basis instead of seeing a read once every other month. So this program continues to grow. One caveat that I will mention with flow meters is that they have a short battery life relative to a smart meter, and they have to be maintained by the customer. So that is something to be remembering. And, a good takeaway from this is that over 2/3 of our residential customers that are applying for the landscape rebate program are just the past couple months were applying for the super rebate over our standard rebate, even with these increased requirements. And so, we have some very large customers participating also in the median strip rebate too. And basically it's, showing that our customers are still interested in these programs, even with the increase in requirements. And next slide. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alice for a wrap up on water conservation.
Yeah, and I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to keep it really quick and just say the takeaways are we have our work cut out for us in terms of regulatory requirements, droughts, some of the water supply challenges that you've heard about already. So we have our work cut out for us. And part of that is really developing some of these new tools like the webinars that Whitney talked about, the new rebate programs, some of the new information systems. I thank you for your support. And I don't know if we have any additional questions or if we want to just move on to the next item.
I will see if anybody has any questions right now. Director McIntosh.
Just have just a quickie on the rebates for medians. What's our outreach to cities? Because I know in West County, a number of the cities are very interested in that. So are we reaching out to public works agencies? How are we reaching them to let them know about this?
Yeah.
So Whitney, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Part of our outreach has been, using our IRIS program, so those large dedicated irrigation customers that Charles talked about earlier, and finding some of those big users out there, reaching out to them and letting them know about this new program we have at the moment. And,
all right, I suggest we reach out to public works departments for cities because those are the ones who really understand the need more specifically. So that's just my suggestion.
We can certainly do that, absolutely.
And I've got a few that you could reach out to too. As I was bicycling home last night, it was dark. The only places sprinklers that were on were for those little median strips between the sidewalk and the street. I even saw somebody walking around out into the street to avoid the water that was just watering the sidewalk. So.
Yeah, you can see Whitney and I both groaning as you mentioned that. That's our nemesis, is that overwatering. But yeah, definitely, we can reach out to, at the beginning of the drought, we did do some outreach proactively to cities. We can certainly reach out to them again and, maybe let them know specifically about the median program. And I see Director Katz's hand is up as well.
Yes, this beautiful picture here reminds me of our garden grant program. We haven't heard a update on that program. I'm very interested in community-based education efforts that help, even in a passive way, educate the community so that when there is an opportunity to take advantage of our super rebate program, or a customer simply decides that it's time to re-landscape their lawn into a garden, that this would be an opportunity to do so. That education is a helpful way of getting the word out and the techniques and the palette of plants that are helpful. And I'm interested in any updates on what's happening in our current programming in that area. And I'd also like to recommend for consideration working with municipalities on not necessarily medians, but small patches of open space that could be converted into a demonstration garden with interpretive guidance so that we could have more passive education in that kind of way. So I'd like to recommend that for future consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. So just real quick, I know we're short on time, but on the garden grant program, it is still active. we are continuing to promote it and receive interest and applications. Clifford, if I might suggest, this might be something we could just follow up with in an info memo with just a little more information on some of our recent garden grant recipients and just some of the other conversations we've had with folks. Would that be acceptable?
Yeah, we'll do an update, info memo on all the questions. So.
Yeah.
I don't see any other hands in the boardroom. I don't see any other hands. So why don't we move on to water recycling?
Great. And I'm going to hand things over to Florence Weddington, Director of Water Recycling.
All right, thank you, Alice. Good morning, President Linney and directors. I will just dive right in since we are short on time. I'll give you a quick update on our East Bay Shore project. Last year, we hired a consultant that was going to help us to evaluate treatment alternatives so that we can reliably produce high quality recycled water with lower salt and ammonia concentrations. By improving the water quality, we'll be able to increase our customer base. And the pilot is currently ongoing, and recommendations from that study will be available in 2023. For our San Ramon Valley Recycled Water Project, we are nearing completion of our phase 2 retrofit project. We successfully completed the retrofit at Canyon Lakes Golf Course last fall, and we anticipate that we'll be able to complete the Crow Canyon Country Club Golf Course retrofit this spring, so it'll be just in time for irrigation season. For our Derwa project, which is our joint project with Dublin San Ramon Services District to provide recycled water to the Tri-Valley, we have been experiencing supply shortages. So in order to meet the peak summer demands, Derwa needed to secure supplemental supply. And so it entered into an agreement with Central San, and we would divert wastewater from Central San's interceptor back to the Dublin San Ramon Services District treatment plant. So last year was the first year that the diversion was operated. It operated from June 21st to September 10th, and it diverted about 58 million gallons of additional supply to Derwa. So that's about 700,000 gallons per day, which is 5% of additional wastewater flow for the Derwa Recycled Water Program. Staff is continuing to work on the joint power agreement side agreement, which allows the agencies to delay updating the many agreements that are currently in place but are in need of updating. During that pause period, we're going to continue to monitor the regulations, wastewater flow trends, Central San's recycling initiatives, as well as implement some demand management strategies. So we're planning to bring this side agreement to the board for consideration next month. And in the meantime, we are working to install some AMI devices on our top 15 customers so that we can help with demand management. And then finally, for Derwa, the agencies are considering bringing the authority manager role in-house as we did a few years ago. For North Richmond, we're continuing with the multi-phase capital improvement projects. Phase 1 is complete. Phase 2 is the construction is nearing completion, and phase 3 is the final phase, and it's in the design stage right now. At RARE, we've noticed that the RO membranes have demonstrated decreased performance. So all of the membrane elements will be replaced starting in April of this year. And the improvements that we're doing at North Richmond and RARE, they will increase the operational reliability and enable the district to continue producing high quality water per our agreements with Chevron. Next slide, please. So last year we talked to you about the Rodale Renewed project. It is now anticipated to be completed in 2024. And based on our recent conversations, they are still planning to transition to recycled water from a 2.8 million gallon per day on-site recycled water treatment facility. So we're going to continue to coordinate with Phillips 66 as they transition to renewable energy. So we have 3 potential satellite projects that we are looking at. The first one, Sequoia Country Club, located in Oakland, is doing an in-depth due diligence study to determine if they'll move forward with a design, build, operate project. They are working with VICO to plan, and they're going to make a decision this spring on whether or not to move forward with that project. The other 2 projects, Diablo Country Club, that's located in the town of Diablo, and the Rossmore project located in Walnut Creek. They are both in our water service area, but they require coordination with Central Sand. These projects were on hold until Central Sand developed a comprehensive plan for moving forward with these types of projects. And just last month, the Central Sand Board adopted their guiding principles for satellite recycled water projects. Next slide, please. So the guiding principles that they adopted have 5 main components. One is cost neutrality. The second one is community input. The third is wastewater supply availability. The fourth is mitigation of technical and operational impacts. And then finally, the projects need to have readiness and the ability to proceed. And that would be demonstrated by completing a feasibility study. So overall, Central Sand's key focus for all of their recycled water efforts is to develop the recycled water projects that will have benefits within their service area, and they want to be able to retain that recycled water supply locally for their customers. So we will continue to coordinate with Central Sand as the Diablo Country Club and Rossmore projects move forward. Next slide, please. So I want to shift the presentation over to unit costs for our recycled water projects. You'll see that we looked at unit costs in 2 different ways. First, we looked at traditional unit cost, assuming that the projects are operated every year. And then we also looked at dry year unit costs, assuming that the projects are operated every year, but only take credit in the dry years when we need water. And it's assumed that 3 out of every 10 years is dry. So the calculations, they will include both capital costs and operating costs, but you'll see that I have the capital costs listed here because they're the predominant cost when calculating the unit cost. And then later in the presentation, you'll see how these costs for recycled water projects compare to other water supply projects. So our existing recycled water program provides up to 9 million gallons per day to our customers for non-potable uses. And that would include things like cooling towers, irrigation, toilet flushing, as well as our truck program. And we've spent $145 million to date on these projects. And that equates to about $1,800 per acre foot for the traditional unit costs, or $6,000 per acre foot when we look at dry year unit costs. Our goal is to expand the recycled water deliveries to 20 million gallons per day by the year 2040. And to add the additional 11 million gallons per day, it's going to cost about $343 million. And that equates to $2,400 per acre foot, or $7,900 per acre foot for dry year unit cost. Next slide, please. So as part of the most recent recycled water master plan update, we evaluated potable reuse options, including reservoir augmentation and raw water augmentation. So here you'll see an example of reservoir augmentation that was evaluated, and that is taking secondary effluent from our main wastewater treatment plant, SD1, and putting it through full advanced treatment. And then that highly treated water would be sent to Briones Reservoir, before it was treated at the Orinda water treatment plant and then into our distribution system. This example is a 10 million gallon per day project, and it's estimated to cost $563 million. The unit cost for this type of project would be $4,300 per acre foot, or a dry year unit cost of $13,200 per acre foot.
Florence, Director Mellon has a question.
Yes.
I'm trying to put my head around the idea that a dry unit cost is 3 times as much as a dry year unit cost is 3 times as much as otherwise. How do we get there with that big a price difference?
So we'll be able to see, later on just how these costs compare to some of our other supplemental supply projects. But we wanted to make sure that we're able to compare apples to apples when we're looking at unit costs, because some of our projects look at dry year unit costs because they're only operated during drought years, which we're assuming is 3 out of every 10 years, which is why the cost is 3 times as high. And so even if a project is operated every year, when we look at the dry year unit cost, we only take credit for the years where we need that extra water.
It's just the math, Fran. It's just the
Yeah.
way to make it into Apple. We would do this every year versus a transfer with Placer County that we would only do in a dry year. So it's a way to compare the cost of that supply over in a dry year. Is that accurate?
That's correct. I think.
Yes.
I don't think I need to add anything to what either Florence or Director Young said.
I'll chat with you more later.
Doug, I'm asking a question here as well. Going back to slide 44, Florence or Mike, we know, Frank and I, on Durwa, that it's a limited supply from Central San until they need it. And I know that they're looking at doing recycled water at the refineries, as well as the potential development at the Concord Naval Weapons Station. So do we have a rough timeline as to when that supply that we got augmented for this year, the 50 million gallons or whatever it was, goes away? One, because that's going to have an impact on all the other presentations that we just had.
Yes. So the agreement that Durwa has with Central San, it is a 3-year agreement with the opportunity to extend for an additional 2 years. So overall, it would be 5 years, but we hope to be able to work with them to extend that beyond the 5 years if necessary.
So, the question is, in the EIRs that are being done for the recycled water they want to provide to Shell Refinery, or P&B, I guess it is now, in the Naval Weapons Station, how much water, how much commodity are they looking at that they would be providing in those areas that would take away from our ability to purchase based on the agreement that we have?
So I think they are looking into that, and that kind of plays into the satellite projects as well. So they want to make sure they're not overextending themselves on the amount of projects that they are approving. So those other projects, the Shell project and the Naval Weapons Station project, those are projects that may or may not happen.
Shell's going to happen.
So, yeah, they're hoping for that, but the amount that is needed is, I guess, an estimate at this point. So all that will play into what we can get for Durwa, but we're hoping that they'll be able to consider that when they're considering other projects as well.
Well, if we can get in writing, it would be fine by memo, what is anticipated for their needs, both at Shell and the Concord Naval Weapons Station for recycled water, just so we gives Frank and I, from a Durwa perspective, a better idea of how long that commodity may exist. And on slide 45, where it talked about the satellite distribution things, the 3 did not mention potentially how many gallons a day like it did in the previous slide on 44. And I guess part of it also is, on slide 46, I have to find my 46 slide here. It's how much, because if we're only looking at 3 out of 10 years because of the dry year supply, and thank you for Florence for the explanation on how that works. How much in a wet year, when we don't need it, let's say, how much opportunity is there for us to put the McCullum River water, more water into the DREAM project in San Joaquin County? I know we have something later on the project in San Leandro, Frank and Doug's favorite project, to look at storing water in excess, when there's excess McCullum River, and taking the recycled water. How much capacity building is there for additional storage for conjunctive use? If we're going to take use more recycled water, which is great, but when we have the excess water off of the McCullum, how much more can be used for beneficial use, whether it be for environment or needs or whatever in the Moore project or locally?
So I can't answer that right now, but we can provide a response back to you.
Florence, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Why
Are
don't you
there any other questions?
I don't see any other hands up. I don't see any other hands. Oh, sorry, Director Katz.
Yes, just, I know we're short on time, so I'll just ask for the information memos. If you can provide some additional updates about the technical testing that's occurring around East Bayshore. Eager to understand what we're doing to confirm its wider availability for more types of building customers. Thanks.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Lawrence, excuse me, this is Doug. Clifford, I just want to do a time check. We're due to start our closed session in 5 minutes. We have a few more slides on the recycled water and quite a few other slides. I'm wondering how you're thinking we might want to handle it.
Yeah, I was just communicating with Risha that we have a fairly short closed session, so we can start closed session at noon. So we
Do
can.
we really expect not to be much public comment?
I can't predict that, Director Coleman.
I would assume we're going to have a fair amount of public comment based on some of the past ones. Doug and Clifford, the things that we're getting into are really critical. I would like personally to have us set aside time so we can delve into it deeper versus trying to do a 10,000 foot view, a gloss over, because we're going to have, I suspect, a lot of public comment because of union negotiations like we've had now for 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, this is enough for a whole another hour workshop, I think. I mean, the questions, I know I have questions about what's in here from what I reviewed earlier, so, and I've been holding questions because of time from the rest of this, so.
So how about we do this? Why don't we finish up the recycled water, and then we'll take whatever questions we have, and then we'll jump to closed session, and we'll find another time to finish up the remainder of the workshop.
Works for me.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, I think that, this is very interesting stuff. There really is new information here. I also think that we, there's just a lot we need to ponder and tease out as we figure out, as we face the drought years that we have ahead. So that sounds like a way to go forward in my mind.
Go ahead, Florence.
Okay, I will continue on. I'll try to go through this quickly and efficiently, but give you the information that you need.
Don't worry about, I mean, I think we all appreciate the information, so let's not hurry it any more than we have to.
Okay, sounds good. So our next project that we looked at is raw water augmentation. So this is one of the examples that was in the master plan, and it includes taking secondary effluent from central sand and putting it through the full advanced treatment. And then that highly treated water would be sent to an engineered storage buffer where the water quality can be validated before being added to our McCollum aqueducts and then treated at one of our water treatment plants and then into the distribution system. And like the previous example, this would be 10 million gallons per day. The capital cost here is $199 million. The unit cost would be $2,500 per acre foot, and the dry year unit cost would be $7,200 per acre foot. And I will note here that the regulations are currently being developed, and they should be established by the end of 2023. Next slide, please. So I'm excited to tell you that we have a couple of projects that are currently using renewable energy. The first one is East Bay Shore, which is located at the main wastewater treatment plant, where they are using biogas to generate enough renewable energy to power both the main water treatment plant as well as the East Bay Shore recycled water facility. And in 2012, EBMUD became the first wastewater treatment plant in North America to produce more renewable energy on site than is needed to run the facility. So in this case, excess renewable energy is sold back to the electrical grid. And at North Richmond, we had solar panels installed in 2018, and they provide an average of 25% of the power needed over the past 4 years. So these projects, they end up cutting the district's fossil fuel use and decrease our greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll continue to look for opportunities to use renewable energy for our future projects. Next slide, please. So in December of 2020, the Water Board approved temporary change petition for the demonstration recharge extraction and aquifer management project, also known as DREAM. And in this case, if we reduce our consumptive use by using recycled water in lieu of potable water, we can transfer surplus water in wet years to our partners so that we can get water in dry years. And there's no refill agreement that's needed. So this ruling by the Water Board can benefit two major projects. One would be potential future phases of the DREAM project, as well as the Los Vaqueros expansion project. And Brad Ledesma, who's up next after me, he'll discuss these projects in more detail in his section of the presentation, which sounds like will be scheduled at a later time. But I would like to just mention that by expanding the recycled water program, the district will have more opportunities to participate in these conjunctive use projects. And then next slide. This is my final slide. I will just summarize what we'll be doing. So we're gonna continue to work to improve the water quality at East Bay Shore. We're going to manage customer demands and seek supplemental supplies for San Ramon, the San Ramon Valley Recycled Water Project. We'll continue to collaborate with Central San on recycled water projects. We'll also continue to communicate with Phillips 66 during their transition to renewable energy. We'll monitor potable reuse regulations. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
See Director Young?
I think it's a short question. Did we do potable reuse estimates for other configurations like, I don't know, main water treatment plant to engineered storage buffer to USL or, you know, Sobranti? Have we looked at those kinds of options as well, or?
We looked at a couple of options, and then there were some that were more cost effective or more viable. that made it into our updated recycled water master plan. And I can provide some summaries of what was done to you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Let's see, I don't see other hands in the boardroom. I don't see any hands online. Okay, so given that, we will conclude this portion of the long-term water supply workshop.
Is there public comment?
Okay, yeah, no, sorry.
Want to make sure that we ask for public comment.
And let me get to. He did. We don't have any hands for public comment.
Okay. Great. Any other board comments or questions? Seems like we hit a lot of the questions we were going along. I don't know. Marguerite, did you get all your comments or questions?
I'll save them for whenever we do our, follow-up.
I'm fine waiting for that as well, Doug.
All right. So I just want to say, fine presentation. I think you've seen from the quantity and quality of questions from board members that, this is certainly a topic of great concern, and one that, given the state's role in trying to deal with all the different agencies across the state, and we're all such a diverse, come from diverse water sources and water needs and climates and everything, it's going to be very challenging for one set of regulations to meet those. But it's very important for us to understand those that are coming down the pike, as well as for us, I think, all to reassess what the future looks like. A lot of these charts to me look similar to what we've seen in the past, but I think given both our experience now with the drought in a few years. I also read an article by Paul Rogers in the San Jose Mercury over the weekend about the prospects for a very serious long-term drought, as in an age that we haven't seen in 1,200 years. That it certainly gives me a different perspective on how I evaluate how we're going to make sure that we have adequate water supply for our customers. So thank you all, staff, for a great presentation, great information, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you very much. We'll find the next convenient time to continue this discussion.
Okay, and then so we'll adjourn the workshop and come back in just a few moments for our closed session.